That's great. So basically for those of you which weren't here the last couple of times, I'm going to just run through a brief recap on what we went through. And 2 sessions ago we went through the talk, what does it mean to be an INFJ? And we went through the 4 different letters, INFJ. So I'm just going to write them out here. Just I, N, F, J. So basically for the Myers-Briggs type, there's a dichotomy that's between the introversion and extroversion, which would be the first pairing. So the opposite of the INFJ of all the other pairings would be E, S, T, and P. But we're going to just focus on these today, the I, the N, F, and the J, us being INFJs. And so the I stands for introversion and is related to our internal world of thoughts and feelings. And we get our energy and attention, it's all directed inwards. And we receive energy from our thoughts, memories and feelings. Our opposite would be extroversion, which get the energy from going out and doing activities or talking to people. Introverts, but typically at the end of the day, want to just curl up, read a book, watch some TV or some Netflix, and just completely zone out or just reflect on the day's events. The second letter N stands for intuition. It prefer to take in information by seeing the big picture, focusing on the relationships and connections between the facts. We look for patterns in data. We're more attuned to seeing more new possibilities. The opposite of this would be sensing, whereby we're focusing on the here and now, the actual concrete facts, data and details. We look at facts and details only in how it relates to the big picture, typically. We look for the patterns in the numbers or data or emotions or trends, and we kind of knit them together to form a picture. And this is an intuitive picture. It's kind of a little bit complicated. And it's like where we put our confidence in our own intuitions rather than in the facts and data per se. So the F in the INFJ stands for feeling. When we make decisions, we prefer to consider what is important to us and others involved. We place the self in the situation and identify where everyone is involved so we can make decisions based on how we honor people. As in, if someone who's a preference for feeling, we create harmony and treat each person as a unique individual. Thinkers, people who have preference for thinking, they would typically detach themselves from the situation. So if there's a problem to solve, it's like they're standing here and they're trying to solve the problem and not necessarily put themselves into the shoes of the person involved or imagine what it would feel like. The decisions are based more on logic and on problem solving. So it's a more detached view towards decision making, which is the third dichotomy. And the final dichotomy is between J and P. And J stands for judging. It doesn't mean that we judge people per se, but it's how structured we prefer our external lives. So we prefer our lives to be structured, and we like to stick to a plan and schedule, bring something to closure, and then move on. We like our lives to be structured and organized and have things settled in advance. And sticking to a plan or a loose plan at least, is of importance to us. Last minute changes would just stress us out. That's not something we have a preference for, where people for preference for P, which stands for perceiving, typically may work towards the deadline and work on the deadline right at the last minute, as opposed to a sequence of steps which we prefer to have, which gets us there. So that's basically in a nutshell what it means to be INFJ, the first 4 letters. So do we have any questions on these 4 letters? Okay, great, very clear. Okay, let's move on to what we talked about last session. We took this one step deeper and we looked at what makes MBTI so much more powerful than just 4 letters. We looked at the level below that, which is the cognitive functions or mental functions, which is how the mind of an INFJ actually operates. For each of the 16 Myers-Briggs types, there's a specific way in which the mind actually functions. And that is the key of what the MBTI is all about. So if you look at the INFJ's 4 cognitive functions, And I'm going to draw a line here to separate the 4 letters from the cognitive function. The first cognitive function was Introverted Intuition, and that's denoted by NI. And Introverted Intuition is the most complex of the mental functions. It's what makes INFJs also what is said to be the most complicated type and the most difficult type to understand. It's a mental function that's convergent in nature, and if I was to draw a diagram to depict how this actually works in our mind, I would draw some kind of funnel. And within this funnel gets all kinds of inputs. So these sensory inputs, these are thinking inputs, these are feelings, everything gets put into here. And what an INFJ mind is trying to do is to try to get all this to converge on a singular point at the bottom, which can be thought about as like a theory of everything. It's our strongest function, and everything goes into here. So that's why the INFJ mind is extremely complicated. There's all kinds of sensory inputs going on. There's a lot of facts, there's a lot of details, there's a lot of patterns going in here. And this is introverted, so you can't see it. People don't know what's going on in our minds. They don't know that we're thinking about everything and anything under the sun. And it's all hidden. This thought process is hidden. And I'm going to denote that in terms of strength, so I'm going to draw some bars here. So this is a very big bar. I'm going to call that the NI bar in terms of the strength of the mental function. The second mental function is called Extroverted Feeling. That's denoted by FE. And this typically is linked to values. It's also linked to sharing of a feeling and emotion. It also centers around maintaining positive, caring, harmonious relationships with others, which I think many of you would love to have. No conflict, nice to have agreement, shared feelings, positive feelings. These are typically devoted by FE, Extroverted Feeling. And this is an extroverted function. So this is how we show up in the world. They don't see what goes on here, but all the thought process comes together, and we typically kind of share a feeling or emotion or judgment, a values judgment on certain things. And it's because it's extroverted, it's actually very hard for an INFJ to put forward a point of view that is different from the consensus in the room or the values that other people have. So if I say it again, it's very hard to say something that's going to disrupt the peace in the room. It's very hard for an INFJ to voice an opinion that is going to cause people to be shocked or upset. That's FE. And I'm going to denote that by the second largest bar. I'm going to call that Extroverted Feeling. The third function we have is an introverted function called Introverted Thinking. And this is kind of, you think about it as a logically consistent singular train of thought. So I'll say that again, it's a logically consistent single train of thought. And we explore this, whereas this is, Introverted Intuition is multi-dimensional and consists of many different inputs from all kinds of different kind of places. It could be different views or countries or people. Everything goes here. Introverted Thinking, it's this logically consistent single train of thought. So the thought can kind of flow, is without boundaries, and we use Introverted Thinking to explore ideas or possibilities and explore the different thought process, like A plus B, and algebra uses Introverted Thinking, kind of something that's logically consistent. And this Introverted Thinking process gets fed into the Introverted Intuition, lots of them. So if you see, this is a separate thread, and this is like a shirt. So this is a thread. So you're knitting them all together. All these threads come together, and you want to see what kind of, maybe a shirt, maybe it's a dress, maybe it's a pair of jeans, but something that's created inside here. All these Introverted Thinking thoughts are fed into this process, and you want something concrete or solid to come out at the end once it's gone through this funnel process, which actually can take quite a while for this thing to crystallize. Another illustration for how these two work with each other, if you think about a diamond, just not very good at art, but I'm going to draw Like what's a diamond here? A diamond consists of many different carbon atoms. We've got a physicist here, so probably understand this more than me. But each of these come together. You kind of create a solid lattice of all the different shapes and forms. And the more of these you input into here, the more refined the diamond's going to be, the shinier it's going to be. And this is like the crowning glory of the INFJ, trying to fit everything into something beautiful. May never actually be completed because the infinite number of inputs can go in here, but the main idea is to get everything to fit together. So the final function, the third function, fourth function here, is SE, and that's Extroverted Sensing. It's an extroverted function. It makes us aware of the external world, experienced through our five senses, like as touch, taste, smell, sight, and hearing. It's also focused on the present and is not concerned with the past or the future. So Introverted Thinking is a smaller function here, and Introverted Sensing is our smallest function. And so in order of size, that's the largest. So what happens when the Extroverted Sensing function is so small, it's linked to the five senses, can make us very sensitive to touch, taste, smell, all these things, because the sensing function is not as well developed or it's not as strong as the intuitive function. We can spend all day in our heads thinking about this, to do physical stuff, to have lots of noise going around, to have a lot of this linked to the five senses is going to be very draining, because typically we're not gifted in this area. This is the area which we're strong in, and this is all of strength of our four mental functions. So I think all this will start to become clear when we look at how these functions actually work in relationships, and how this stuff, which is unseen, how the mind works, how that shows up in everyday life. So before we move on to INFJ and relationships, if you have any questions on the mental functions and how an INFJ mind works? All good? Okay. So with that summary, that brings us to today's talk. What are INFJs like in relationships? So now we understand how the mind of an INFJ works. Let's look at what INFJs are like in relationships. So I'm going to talk about some of the characteristics INFJs have. The first one would be deep, complex, and introspective. Okay, just about fits. So as talked about earlier, the Introverted Intuition function is extremely complex. And in fact, INFJs struggle to be understood. And often it hurts when INFJs put out the deeper self and have it met with a blank expression, or even worse, be misunderstood. So how it works in relationships is like layers of an onion. So I'm just going to draw an onion here. You're all familiar with an onion. It has many, many different layers. And it's right as the core. So this is an onion. And what can happen is, like in relationships, INFJs will typically just share the outermost layer with someone they just meet. So they'll be sharing this part, the outermost layer of the onion. And what INFJ will do is to share that part with someone in an everyday conversation. It may be superficial small talk. It may actually have hints of something deeper. So remember, INFJ wants to be understood at the deepest level. And how that works is, when they put out a bit of themselves, you'll see how well the response is and how the other person or the group responds. And if what the INFJ puts out, the outer layer, is met with a positive or favorable response, the INFJ will kind of feel a bit better and start to share the next layer of the onion. So they'll start to share something a bit deeper, maybe a bit more personal, and see what the response is like there. If it's favorable and what the INFJ says is accepted and validated, INFJ will start to share more and more and more about themselves to the other person. Typically you don't get to the innermost layer, that part's very guarded. INFJs are known as being very secretive because this part of an INFJ is rarely shared with other people, and it's very complicated. And this part, the most complicated function, actually varies from INFJ to INFJ, and is very personal. So at the heart of it, there may be some kind of art, some esoteric theories of life, spirituality, and other mysteries of the universe, which the INFJ has been thinking about forever, his or her own life, and would love to share that with someone, but not many people can understand what all that's about. So it stays there, rarely to be shown to the external world. So the second characteristic I'd like to talk about is adaptability. So a strong introverted intuition combined with extroverted feeling makes an INFJ extremely adaptable to all kinds of situations. And only an INFJ being only 1% of the population or thereabouts makes us used to being the only INFJ in a group of people, a group of co-workers, family, friends. Probably you're going to be the only INFJ in your group. And as a result, INFJs are experts at blending in, and they can read the feelings of the room with a strong extroverted feeling and are able to adapt in such a way that they don't stand out. So at this point, INFJs are found in almost every corner of the world, many different parts of society. Blending in, you won't know if they're INFJ because typically you can't see what's going on here, and you see extroverted feeling and what they put forward out there in the world, maybe not too dissimilar from what other people are doing. This kind of makes us very adaptable. We see what's happening, we read the emotions, we know how to behave, and we can behave with the feeling, which makes us very similar to everyone else, at least on the surface, and they don't see that onion, what's underneath the surface. The downside of blending in is that it can be very, very draining. Blending in is often done in favor of authenticity, and what that happens is that many of these social interactions, an INFJ is left feeling very drained. Third one here, INFJs are empathetic. Also natural counsellors. And we have a counsellor in our midst today. INFJs are natural counsellors. Again, the combination of introverted intuition plus extroverted feeling makes an INFJ able to look deeply into another person's emotions. Emotions are like food to an INFJ, and we feed off these emotions. We hinge off every word that the person says and every response of facial expression, which all gets fed into here, to determine the ultimate meaning to what the person is trying to convey to us. So they're extremely suited for one-to-one or counseling roles, whereby you can get all kinds of sensory inputs and other kinds of inputs, emotional inputs and everything into questions that the INFJ asks, and which is typically very good at questioning, and that would kind of lead to them to understanding the ultimate meaning behind what was said. This can often make it very intense, and often reading the motives and intentions of other people, INFJs can know what the other person is going through even before the other person knows it themselves. So people may be struggling to find how they feel about something, but INFJs can kind of see how they feel even before that person gets there. And INFJs are normally surrounded by friends who relish the fact that the INFJ is wise in their insight and their insight into personal situations, and there may be work or people related, but the INFJ often has a golden nugget to share, which can help the person in the situation. And the flip side of these relationships, however, is that an INFJ is going to be left as natural givers in the relationship. Too much of these type of friendships can be overwhelming, and especially if the INFJ is giving all the time to the use of these functions, it can leave the INFJ feeling very drained and depleted. So the fourth characteristic is sensitivity. We talked a little bit about this over here with the extroverted sensing function being the weakest, this inferior function plus these two combined together make an INFJ a very, very sensitive person. Most INFJs I know also fall into the category of highly sensitive person, or HSPs, and this level of sensitivity does apply also to the physical world. For example, in the areas of taste, INFJs can have very sensitive palates, being sensitive to certain types of foods and tastes. They also may have a very refined palate, liking certain brands or types of coffee, wine or cocktails, fruits and meats. The tongue can be very sensitive to picking up the nuances and flavors in all these different types of foods and drinks. The sensitivity can also apply to noise. Too much noise can also disturb the concentration of many INFJs. So working in a coffee shop with a laptop with noisy surroundings is very hard to concentrate, unless of course you're wearing thick noise cancellation earphones. Sensitivity can also apply to touch. Some INFJs are quite uneasy with touch, or sensitive to different materials on your clothes you can feel on your skin. If there's a label sticking at the back and it's right at the back of the neck, that can really cause some INFJs to manifest in like that kind of irritation that goes with rough clothes or something along those lines. Mosquito bites or insect bites are also pretty taxing for an INFJ. Sensitivity also applies to pain, so watching violent or horror movies or torture scenes can be proved to be also very disturbing for many INFJs. One more thing on sensitivity, INFJs are also very sensitive to criticism. So when INFJs are very sensitive to criticism, they rarely criticize others themselves. There's Introverted Intuition plus Extroverted Feeling makes the INFJ well suited to taking care of the emotions of others. So every action or word that an INFJ says is normally filtered very carefully, and words are specifically measured to create the right emotion or the feeling in the room. If all the thought can be put to choosing the words, and it may not, if it doesn't land well with the other person, that can be a big blow to an INFJ. It takes so much effort to be sensitive to the emotions of another person. Okay, number 5 is a big one. Idealistic. INFJs are pretty idealistic in relationships. They hold themselves and others to a very high standard, especially within a relationship. So this NI again crystallizes the vision of how things should be. So once an INFJ works out in their head how the relationship should work out, they may be dismayed to see that the relationship in reality, when it doesn't actually work out as how they hoped, extremely crushed and disappointment. So you have an internal vision of your mind of what you would like to see happen in the relationship, and also of the feelings that may materialize when you're in a particular situation. So let me give you an example. Supposing one day you have a dream, you may meet a particular guy or girl, and you have an internal vision in your relationship. It should consist of perhaps maybe having lots of deep talks over dinner or going to a movie every week. You dream when you meet this special person, you'll be extremely connected to them, and you feel alive, and you just go with the flow, and your true self will finally be awakened. So sound familiar? Yes. Okay, so when this doesn't happen in reality, like maybe you don't go out as much as you had hoped, and the connection just isn't flowing as naturally, I think you're going to be pretty disappointed, right? And over time, I think you will start to doubt whether the person is the right person for you. Well, that's part of the INFJ's idealism in relationships. So the 6th one is time alone. This is very important. All that emotions can happen in human interactions. INFJs do need significant time alone to recharge and just get their strength back and get their mind clear about things. So an INFJ may need to retreat to their bedroom or man cave, whichever you prefer, and just spend some quality time alone there. So the best work happens alone. This introverted stuff, all this thinking and and puzzling about what's going on. That happens alone, and that's where we go to make sense of the world, to our own little corner, wherever that is. Every interaction, every conversation that took place over the day gets replayed again and again and again, especially ones that have the strong emotional charge to them, and until we can make sense of it. And there's actually no point talking to us when we haven't had sufficient time alone to process all the information. It's going to come out as some kind of incoherent jumble that we don't even comprehend ourselves, because it's so puzzling. We haven't made sense of all that. So one more thing is INFJs can be slow to initiate. So this takes a long time to process stuff. It just takes a while. INFJs are typically not very spontaneous, and can make them slower to move in a crisis situation. So let me give you an example. Say Kevin suddenly collapses on the floor in front of us. Not that you will, of course, but it may take us a while to figure out what the right course of action will be. We'll be mentally processing all that's going on. Our hearts will be shocked, extroverted feeling, and it may be hard to spring to action. We'll be thinking, shall we call an ambulance? Maybe we should check his pulse, see if it's okay. Why did he collapse? He's just fine a while ago. Was it something I said? So all this while, he's still there lying on the floor. So while we're slower to react or initiate an action, because we're still thinking through all the angles, we're trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. He's collapsed, what do we do? All these things that can be going on. And that makes us slower to initiate action. The final one of the INFJ characteristics is devastating. And you're probably wondering what I mean by this. So under stress, an INFJ can come up with some of the most cutting and strong statements. And see what this does, NI plus FE, causes the other person to come up, causes us to come up with things which under stress or when hurt can share that extroverted feeling in a very deep way. This can probe for character flaws within people, and you can see stuff within people that you may want to share with them, stuff that hurts. So under extreme stress, the INFJ can explode into some kind of very strong, cutting statements that are likely to hit the other person the hardest, with this kind of deep hammer into the other person's character. But what would then happen is an INFJ would then retreat maybe for days and regret the uncharacteristic outburst. And glad to say, in most cases, generally these outbursts are few and far between. And if an INFJ is repeatedly exposed to this kind of environment, an INFJ may cut that person out of the relationship altogether. So those are what INFJs are like in relationships. The next part, do you have any questions on what INFJs are like?
Is it possible for an INFJ to turn that devastating aspect inwards?
Oh yes.
Self-criticism,
yes.
And then lapse into depression?
Oh, definitely. Yes, that's another good point. This self-criticism. Why am I not measuring up? Other people seem to have it a lot easier, a lot better. There must be something wrong with me. This kind of can feed inwards as well as outwards. Extremely skeptical again goes back to being idealistic on the sense of self. I'm not measuring up. This must be perhaps a bit flawed, deficient, and what's wrong with me? Why can't I show up the way other people do? That's definitely something that happened. Yeah, great question. Anyone else? Okay. So we're going to look at the final part of this is, what do INFJs look for in a relationship? The first one I would say is deep understanding and emotional connection. So again, going back to the onion analogy, this INFJ wants to be connected at the heart of themselves, find someone they can share their deep insights with at the core. INFJ creates a huge inner world that keeps getting larger and larger, it seems, with age. And we long to find someone who can share this deep inner world with. And why is this? Introverted intuition is the best part of ourselves. It's hidden. We want to be able to peel back this layer and show the refined crystal or diamond that's in the rough, what the result of all that processing, all that thoughts. We want to be able to share that with someone. And this is far from easy task, because if someone has the ability to listen to an INFJ's ideas and respond appropriately to them, this will naturally cause an INFJ to come out of hiding and want to spend more time with that person. But to be honest, there aren't that many personality types which can understand all this, or understand the many layers of an onion. Typically, the first couple of layers will be happy with someone who can meet us at those levels. Typically not at the heart of it. It's just so complicated, and most people haven't got the patience, time to understand what's going on, which can lead to INFJs feeling quite isolated and alone in the world, as if being the smallest percentage that I'm as big is not enough. There's actually a reason why people can't understand us. They're not wired the same way to process complex thought the way we can. Second one, that what INFJs look for in relationship is intellect. Now, according to one study I've seen, INFJs have on average, the second highest IQ. INFJ ideas can be extremely complicated, and an intellectual connection is important. Imagine trying to explain your whole huge theories on life with anyone who can't follow, or has no interest in discussing intellectual ideas. I think you're going to feel pretty bored and isolated. What else do INFJs look for? They look for trust. Trust is important. INFJs are extremely selective with their friends. They prefer a small number of close friends. And INFJs are in for the long haul, whether in every relationship, whether friendship or a romantic relationship, has the potential in their mind to be a lifelong one. The connections that are made, that INFJ makes, are deep, and they can treasure this relationship for the rest of their life. So trust is important, and INFJs are extremely private people. If we do manage to find someone we can share some of the innermost thoughts with and the deepest, darkest secrets, we would hope they will be trustworthy and they can keep a secret. So nothing would be more hurtful for an INFJ to be betrayed by someone you trust. So if an INFJ tells you something and asks you to keep a secret, they'll like you to see you keep it that way. So if you're betraying an INFJ, and you're pretty sure that before long they're not going to tell you anything after that. So INFJs also look for fun. Now, with all that processing, INFJs are in their heads a lot and don't typically focus on the present. The focus is on a big long-term vision, or on the past, or reflecting on some of the events that have happened in our own lives that have led us to this point. So it's all too easy for an INFJ to look around and see the people who are having so much fun in the present and wonder why it doesn't seem possible. And INFJs do want to have fun, but creating fun for an INFJ doesn't come all that naturally. INFJs are too often deep and introspective and may find it hard to go out and have fun. So I find it sometimes a lot easier to join in the fun that someone else has created rather than creating my own fun. That's a bit more challenging. So the fifth characteristic is balance, and balance is very important, especially we talked about in relationships. INFJs is always giving with this FE function, Extroverted Feeling, to taking care of the feelings of other people, especially those close to them, and making sure they're okay, making sure they feel good, and making sure everything's taken care of. So especially balance is important in the relationship in the area of giving and receiving. In a romantic relationship or friendship, INFJ is often the one that's constantly giving and may feel depleted. So in contrast, if an INFJ is in a more balanced relationship, there's a natural flow of giving that and receiving that will cause an INFJ to feel recharged and energized rather than be always giving. So the sixth one is authenticity. Authenticity is very important. INFJs are too often willing to give other people the benefit of the doubt. So introverted intuition is a perceiving function. So at the same time, it's exploratory and will continue to explore and seek the truth. But when INFJ can't stand being around someone who is fake, deceitful, or manipulative, and that just won't do it. It's okay if the person says something that they don't necessarily agree with 100%, and INFJs are typically able to look for the grain of truth in any given situation. NI filters these arguments. So this is kind of a funnel, it's filtering. When you're listening out and you're talking to people, this kind of filters the truth from what they say. So if there's some truth in what they're saying, typically an INFJ will filter out the rest and filters the arguments. But if an INFJ finds out they've been deliberately deceived or lied to and had their kindness taken advantage of, that's a deal breaker and a definite no-no. So authenticity in relationships is very important. And my final point here for what INFJs look for is a good listener. It can take a while for an INFJ to make the point. It's both how the mind functions, it filters through a lot of things. So pulling together many ideas to make a single point may be laborious, but it's exactly how an INFJ communicates and likes to be understood. For example, a question like someone goes up to you and says, "How's your day?" So it's not normally easily communicated in a single line for an INFJ, especially when what's happened in the day and has a lot of different ups and downs, and not everything was great. So the INFJ answer may consist of multiple points. They're probably thinking to themselves, and you don't see this. "Oh, I missed the bus to work, so I was late. But I had a good lunch with my coworker. And I got this phone call that really stressed me out. But then I managed to finish all my work so I could go home early. So I guess it's hard to say whether it was a good day or bad day." So at the end of the day, the INFJ will probably just tell you, "It was okay." So if an INFJ actually comes to verbalize this thought process, it will come out extremely convoluted. And the other person is already switched off halfway. So sometimes okay, maybe there's a lot of other stuff behind it. So these are all the 7 things that I see, main things I see INFJs look for in a relationship. And that brings me to the conclusion of today's talk. So do you have any questions?
A question.
Okay.
Do INFJs naturally understand another INFJ?
Easier to understand, yeah, because I've talked to a lot of different INFJs, and because their mind works the same way, these two are almost never seen in tandem with each other in any of the other 15 personality types. So like I was saying, like, how's your day? There's many different inputs. So maybe there's a good day, bad day, then eventually you say this is an okay day. So it's very hard for anyone else to follow this thought process, an introverted thought process that's not complete. So it will be one input here, another input here, another input, another input. And with some of my INFJ friends, they can follow these different threads. So there are many of these going on simultaneously. So maybe an INFJ will talk about point number 1, then there's point number 2, and point number 3. They actually haven't reached their conclusion yet, they're just thinking out loud. Point number 4, to be able to hold 4 different threads at the same time and still be working to focus on what is the ultimate answer to the question is extremely difficult for anyone else to follow. So I think, in terms of understanding, there's probably no other type that can follow this. There's another type which uses this thought process, so they can't actually follow it. If that answers your question.
But an INFJ wouldn't necessarily verbalize because it's really difficult to.
This is extremely hard. A lot. For most of my life, this couldn't even come out because this is too complicated. How are you going to explain it? You're going to start with one sentence and then you cut yourself off, you jump to another thought, another thought, another thought. And the person just trying to get a simple answer to a question. Yes or no? Oh, it's great. Okay, move on. Especially those which use other functions, which we haven't talked about today, like extroverted thinking, which is more of a linear thought process. It's more this like this rather than like that. They just want a simple answer.
Just wondering, are there other personality types that function similar to INFJs?
Yeah. The other one which does introverted intuition as the dominant function is the INTJ. They use that. So if I draw the INTJ functions, they also use this, but it comes out extroverted thinking. So this is related to more science, business, economics, law, and INTJs can show up in studying astrophysics or black holes or the universe, or they can also show up in computer science and building complicated systems about business and economics. So because they're thinking people, they're not focused on feelings the way an INFJ does. It's a thinking function. And this is the INTJ, this is Introverted Feeling, next one. And the other one which uses this strongly is the INTP. Kind of follows that process. This would be the strongest function. So the INTPs, that would just go on, can go on forever, because that's the strongest. We will cut it short. They will keep going on. So they get introverted thinking, but that's just one of our threads. So if we're going to talk about stuff on one thread, we can keep up, but they don't have this function. Feeds everything together to create this complex lattice structure. That's every personality is unique in how they behave, but some are a lot easier to follow their thought process. The INFJ is the most complicated. Yeah.
Can an INFJ sort of become other personalities when he or she is with other people?
Different personality. This stuff doesn't change. So if introverted intuition is your most, these are the strengths. These are not changing. The research and theory has been guided. These don't change in terms of size. But if you're behaving with other extroverted feeling people, you may use this function. They don't see that. You may shut it down. When I'm playing sports with a tennis or badminton or whatever, they see extroverted sensing, movement, senses in the moment. They don't see that. It may look like someone who uses strong extroverted sensing. Some INFJs I know are good at dancing, so when they're dancing with the salsa or Latin, they may look like any other athlete, but you don't see what's going on. They're just using that. So these are extroverted functions, these are introverted ones. So you can see this extroverted feeling out there, extroverted sensing. Can behave like sports or carpentry or things like that. May look very similar, but it doesn't mean that you're not an INFJ, you're just not using that function. Whereas typically you get drained doing too much sensing stuff, so I don't think any INFJs could actually stay doing sports all day or dancing all day. It'll be like a full-time athlete for the entire life. Eventually that part will burn out because it's not very strong. And they revert to what gives them the most energy, which is focusing on deep insights into people or possibilities for people. So working career-wise, you probably want to be focusing on these two functions the most, even though a lot of INFJs have been using this, like TI is related to maths and physics. This part you may have developed to be pretty strong, but you can't keep up with other people who use that, who spend all their time there energized by their strongest functions. So you want to be using your strongest too, to be the most alive and energized. Okay.